What's up, guys? This is going to be part one of, I don't really know how many parts of video we're going to do on this upgrades for the camper, but this is definitely going to be part one. We're going to start on all the stuff we don't have to wait on Amazon for. And I'm going to start right here in this corner by making our cabinet, pantry. I'm not really sure what it's going to be right now, but that's where we're going to start. So here we go.
So to get started on this build, I started with a cardboard template. I made it as accurate as I could so the end product would fit as well as I could make it. I took all my measurements and transferred it to the piece of cardboard and cut it out with a utility knife. I fine-tuned it until I liked exactly the shape I wanted. I had to trim it a few different times just to make it fit as best as it could. Ended up with a pretty good
As you can see
product.
behind me, my shop is a total wreck, and I'm going to take a little bit to clean it up. Super high speed. I'm going to go from here to clean, and then we're going to start building.
Cleaning the shop's been something I've been needing to do for quite a while, and building all these things for the camper really motivated me to get it cleaned up the best I could. Definitely needs some more work, but we did a pretty good job cleaning it up.
And just like that, we did a pretty good job cleaning up. Be plenty of room to work on this cabinet because I'm still waiting on stuff for Amazon, and I figured I'd knock out the stuff that I can build here and don't need anything from Amazon for. But we're gonna get our cardboard template and start making.
Now it's time to start building the cabinet. I laid out my cardboard template on our plywood that we were going to use and cut out just a big square of plywood to start with. I laid out where all the frame parts would be so I could get a really accurate measurement on the corners. I had some 1/2 inch plywood left over from a previous project, and I cut it down into 1.25 inch strips to make the frame parts. I ended up needing 8 pieces that were about 6 foot long. I clamped them all together to get as many cuts as I could out of one cut. That way I wasn't cutting and cutting and cutting. Eventually I cut the pieces down to the general size and then took them to the corners, marked out the corners to where they would fit the best. Made some marks and took all my small pieces to the saw and cut the angles on the edges that I needed to. This took quite a while, but it was worth the effort. I got some clamps, laid out all my parts. As you can see, some of them are different shaped, and that's just so the corners wouldn't line up perfectly. I laid the bottom layer out. And put the front spacer in, and then glued everything together. I really only got these spring clamps, but they worked pretty good for this project. Eventually I'll be getting a whole bunch more of different style clamps for my other projects, but these worked pretty good for this one. I used 1-inch staples. Along with that and the glue, I think this will hold together pretty well. Filled it up with plenty of staples. They were a little bit too long for my stuff, and I ended up having to hammer down the back edge of the staples, but I was covering them up anyway, so it didn't really matter. I did that to both of them, stacked them together, glued them, cleaned all the glue up, unclamped them, took it out to the camper just to make sure it fit like I needed to and didn't need to make any adjustments, because now was the time to do it. It was almost an exact fit, so I was pretty happy with it. So I came back in, cut the plywood sides, I cut 2 to start with. One for the inside face of the cabinet that was going to be up against the wall, and one for the outside. I'll eventually cut another one for the inside face. That way the one side that you can see inside and out is covered on both edges. Once I had the plywood sides where I liked them, I glued and stapled them to the frame. The clamps just temporarily held the plywood in place while I stapled it down. After that, the staples will hold it till the glue dries. Some of the edges were hanging over my plywood frame, so I took my grinder with the sanding wheel and sanded it off to the edge of the frame. This definitely isn't a finished sander, definitely for roughing it off, but it did a really good job for what I needed it to, and it did it really fast. Here I'm just knocking off the big burrs on it. That's what we're shooting for. Alright, back to the build. So I needed to cut pieces that would widen the frame out to the width that I needed to. So I just took some 2x2 scraps that I had from a previous project, cut them to size, ended up just making 5 of them, which was plenty for this small cabinet. Here I am attaching the spreaders for the cabinet. I use 3-inch deck screws because I have tons of them left from other projects that we've been working on around the house, and they worked great. All the screw heads will be covered by trim that I'll eventually make, and I did a layout of the square to make sure I wasn't going to miss the wood as I pre-drilled my holes. got all my cross supports in, flipped it over, and did the same thing to the other side. Took it into the camper for one more final fit, just to make sure I didn't have to do any major redos on the cabinet itself. As you can see, it was a pretty tight fit, but it ended up being that piece of trim against the wall that I just had to take off. That's how close I made this. It was within probably less than 1/8 of an inch from it fitting perfectly. So I removed this one small piece of trim, and as you'll see, the cabinet fits just like it should. I'll eventually make trim to go against the edge of the wall, but for now this is good enough. I decided I want to put a base in it, so I had another scrap of 1/2 inch plywood that I cut into strips that fit from front to back, and then I ripped one of them down, and we'll eventually cover it with contact paper that matches the rest of our cabinets. I put one screw in and took the front board off because it was a little bit out of square, and I used that to re-square the cabinet back up, and it ended up fitting better in the camper than it did before. I took some measurements for the trim on the front of the cabinet, and I just used whatever was left of my plywood and cut 2-inch strips. I didn't need 2-inch strips for the whole thing all the way around, but that was the biggest measurement. And instead of cutting a bunch of different pieces, I just used my router once I had them attached and trimmed that down. Here I am cutting exact pieces that I need for the face plates. I'm calling it the trim. You have to be careful on some of this plywood because it has voids in it. You don't want to see voids in the finished product. As you can see, the plywood overhangs, but like I said, we're just going to run our router around the outside and it'll end up perfect. So I glued it on. That way I would only need as few staples as possible. That way there weren't so many visible. And again, the clamps were just to hold until the staples were in, and the staples would hold it till the glue was dry. I lost my router footage. I accidentally took a picture instead of making a video clip. So that was me just demonstrating. I went all the way around it, and now I'm laying out for my door. And I took some 1x6 material that I ripped down into 2-inch strips. The 2-inch strips are going to be in my door frame. And that's what I'm shooting for, is a half lap on these frames, or on the door frame. I set my stop up on the back end of the router, that way I wouldn't go past the width of my pieces and I routed the ends of them. Made some micro adjustments to it until I had them all exactly like I wanted. And you can see the fitment here is just about perfect. It's just going to be a little bit of light sanding and it'll fit great. Now I'm going to route a spot for the plexiglass to fit into. After I got all my pieces done, I put them on the table just to make sure they fit well, and that way I could get a measurement for my plexiglass. This acrylic cuts pretty easy with the circular saw. I took one edge of the door apart, slid the plexiglass in, reassembled it just with some clamps and to make sure it fit well. So I liked it, took it all apart, glued up the ends, and reassembled it. I didn't use any staples on this because the glue was going to be strong enough. I just left the clamps on until the door dried. I did find this almost exact same hardware, same width on the spread for the studs, and just a little bit shy on the front. But other than that, it was almost a perfect match. So while the glue was drying, I did some layout for the handle and attached the handle to the door. Once the handle was attached, I moved on to the hinges. These weren't an exact match, but they were pretty close to what the factory ones are. So I laid the hinges out 8 inches from each end, right in the center hole, and pre-drilled for the screws to go in. I used a couple scraps of 2x4 that ended up being the exact height that the door was off of the floor, and that would center it up in the frame. Once I got the hinges attached, I started on the catch. It's the same kind of catch as what the factory installs, so I figured I'd just stay with it. Latch works good.
This is the finished product.
And there it is.
I've got some trim to put along the back edge and the bottom to match, but I think it looks pretty good. I don't know if we're gonna paint it or stain it yet, but as far as I know, we're probably gonna stain it to match. This is it. It probably took, I don't know, a full day, a lot longer because I had to wait for glue and stuff to dry. but I like the way it turned out. Not bad. I should have turned the door over. I got a ding right here, piece of wood chunked out, but that's all right. It opens all the way up. We can get our totes in there. Just need to sand it and like I said, paint it or stain it. I think we're probably gonna stain it, but that's it. Guys, thank you so much for following us along with this build. It turned out really well. Like I said, we're gonna paint it or stain it. We're really not sure yet. Probably gonna stain it to match, but I don't know. We found the right hardware for it to match, so we'll probably stain it. Like I said, that way it all matches. We like it. It turned out really well. It'll do what we need it to do. I think our next project is going to be changing this under storage. So follow us along with that one. We're on Instagram now. Same thing. Small Family Big Dreams. Follow us on there. We do give updates as our projects go. And again, like us, give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, and keep up with our latest projects. Thanks.